Hello and welcome to our series, our web series, Financial Health for Tribal Producers. This is the second of our series today and is building on your business foundation. Part one, financial analysis is what we're going to be doing. And this is this whole series, the two we did last week and the two this week and the two in a few more weeks. It's going to take a little break in here. It gives you time to work on some of these things we talked about. But this is all sponsored by a grant from the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center there at Washington State University, and they're part of the grant that they got from NIFA, which is the International Institute of Food and Ag. So, and there's a group of people behind this. Ruby Ward, professor at Utah State University, will be taking the lead on this one today. I'm Trent Tiggerson, Associate Director of Tribal Extension Program at U of A. Vicki Hebb, who was our lead last time at the University of Nevada, Reno, and rancher. And Juan Arias is at the University of Arizona and is as a tribal agent at San Carlos, Apache. And then there's a group down here that we worked on a prior project to this that's been instrumental in a lot of the resources, some of the resources we're using in this one as we go through. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ruby, and she's going to start on financials.
So what we're really looking at here is how do we increase our profit? So we're not doing financial analysis to have less money. We're really, the reason we're looking at our finances and all of this and making our business plans and everything is really to be able to be more profitable, be more secure in our financial position. So if we think about that, money flows into the tank from selling our calves and other types of things, and the money flows out as we have to pay for people to help us take care of our animals. We have to pay for our leases or our pasture. We may have to buy extra feed, other types of things, vet bills and stuff. So money's flowing out. And really what we're concerned about is then what's left in the tank. Can we get that tank level to be higher? Can we really kind of increase our tank level? And so when we think about making a change or analyzing our situation to make a change, what we're really wanting to do is have whatever that change is, what flows in from that change should be more than what flows out. So we're trying to get more to flow in and less to flow out. And it's really just getting that water level to go up. So like I said, a change with more flows in than more flows out. And so, and a lot of times when we're looking at trying to make our operation more profitable, it really comes down to making some type of a change. And that could be something really minor, but it could be something a lot bigger. And so some of the other presentations looked at starting a cattle operation or some of those big questions that you can ask about your operation. And so as we make changes to those, that could affect the cash flow. And as we're making those changes, and we said in the last one, what steps can I take to make myself better? We're really looking at is, can we get that flow higher? Can we have less flow in than flows, more flow in and less flow out from that change?
Ruby, and sometimes it's probably not what they're thinking might be it. You know, if you think you might know, but until you start to analyze it, it may surprise you what really is impacting you on these, and that's part of this. Would you say?
Okay, and by analyzing, Trent means that once you look at your numbers and what's going in and out, you will then be able to determine where you're at.
Yeah.
So today we're not going to talk so much about how to keep track of your numbers. We're going to talk to you about what numbers you might need to do things and start to look at this and how you might use them. And then I think that helps you to know what numbers you really need to keep track of and starting up from that standpoint. And some of the webinars last week that we have the recordings for helped us kind of know a little bit about how to keep records and some of those things. So this builds on that. So what do we use this bottom line for? Why do I need money in my tank? It makes the principal payments. We also call that servicing debt. So if you have loan payments, the interest part is the cost of using those, but the principal part of it to actually pay the loan back, we need money in the tank to do that. If I want to reinvest in my business, or you know, I need a piece of equipment, or I need working capital, just money to work with, then I need to use that tank to do that. And also, if we want to take money out of the business to help support our family, that's not flowing out for the business. We need money left in the tank after the business has used what it's using to be able to take it out for the family. And so that's why we want money in the tank. And so there's 3 legs supporting the cow-calf industry: the animals, the range, and then the economics. And so records of all 3 items linked together are needed to make good management decisions. So again, what we're really kind of talking about what we can do with, and why we need the information. But when you go through here, you really need to think about, it's not just about the money. We're talking about financial analysis today, but that's really comes back to every dollar, every number comes back to a range condition or an animal condition. Something that's going on physically on the ranch is all linked together. So here we have a picture of some animals, and which is more profitable?
Well, Vicki, you see it's really hard to see which one would be more profitable.
Yeah,
Isn't it?
exactly.
Just by looking out there, scanning them.
Right.
I don't use phenotyping, which means just looking at an animal is not going to tell you which one's more profitable. You really have to be able to back that up.
Absolutely. It's super important to understand what your crop is and what your goals are, because you have 2 different crops here, honestly, unless this is just one calf crop and then you're looking at a younger animal versus an older animal.
Right, right.
Sometimes we can see an operation as we're driving down a road and we think, wow, they look really great. But just because they look great is not always making the most profitable operation. And so it really comes down to kind of what's going on underneath the surface with some of the money and stuff that, again, is linked to the animals and linked to the range and stuff. But that's really kind of what we're after here. Because the truth is we can't tell. From this picture, we can tell a lot of things about these animals, but we can't tell what's more profitable.
Absolutely.
So in this presentation, we're going to look at what is profit, because we keep talking about it, but we haven't really defined it. So I want to kind of think about what it is and ways to increase our profit, because again, that's why we do financial analysis. Nobody comes to me to say, Ruby, I need to understand how to do some finances or analyze my business because I'm making too much money. It's always they're coming to me because they want to make more money. So when we're talking about these presentations, it's really the only reason we're doing it is to really kind of look at, can we shore up that income from our operation? And that can also help us shore up our family's income too. And so that's really what we're looking here. And then I'm going to give you a tool to analyze your business, and that's sensitivity analysis. And this tool is an Excel file, and it'll be posted on the University of Arizona Tribal Extension page. You can also work with your FERTEP agents or others if you want to help in using it, or come back to any of us. But it's the simplest tool that Trent and I have found, and we've also worked with Juan and Vicki with it over the years, to really kind of do some sensitivity or do some financial analysis. So that's where we're headed today. So here is what it all boils down to. What is profit? This is a mathematical equation, but it's more just about understanding, I think, not really how to crunch the numbers here, but you can't do any of the other stuff until you really kind of understand how they play together. And so if you take what you sell something for, the price minus the variable costs, that's your margin. And margin is really important. Variable cost just means any cost that varies with the amount that you do. So it's your feed, because you have more animals, you have to feed them more, so that cost changes, so it's a variable cost. The vet bills are going to go up if you have more animals, so that's a variable cost. But maybe your truck or your trailer is a fixed cost, because you have a few more, if you buy a few more animals, you're not going to buy another truck for a couple more animals. But if you have a couple more animals, you are going to have more feed. You're going to have more vet bills and those types of things, more vaccinations. So all of those things that vary with having another animal are your variable costs. And then your fixed costs are fixed no matter if you go up or down in the numbers that you have a little bit.
And let's not forget, this is what we were talking about in our webinar earlier today, where you determine if you're able to buy something or not based on your numbers. So this is what I promised was coming today, and that's what Ruby's going over.
So if we take our price, what we sell something for, minus our variable costs, that's our margin. And margin's really important because it's the foundation of having a profitable business. And so we're going to get more into it, but the margin, and then if we multiply that margin by the quantity, so how many we have of that, then that gives us the amount of funds that we have to cover our profit or cover our fixed costs. And after we take out our fixed costs, that's what we're left with in our tank, or that's also our profit. And so as we talk about making changes or we talk about doing analysis, really there is nothing else that you can modify to get more profit. It has to be something with the price, it has to be something with your costs, it has to be something with your quantity. One of these factors is what you have to change. And that's why I think it's so important to understand where profit comes from. And it's not some mysterious thing. We can really kind of put numbers to it. So again, we're talking about that water level. We want more to flow in and less to flow out. And so that price times the quantity, that's the money flowing in, the number of calves you sell, what you sell them for, your other animals you might sell, money flowing out, all the bills that we pay. And we're really after changes that give us more profit. And so then we look at how do I improve our margins? So over the years, when we've worked with an individual operation or we've been called in and just kind of talking about things, the first thing that I always do is I'm asking questions to try to find out what is their margin. So whether they've kept track of that and know it or not, that's really something, the first step that we're looking for. And so, and if we want to increase that margin, we've got to either increase the price, so get more out of what we sell. We've got to lower our expenses or our costs, or we've got to increase our yield. And so for cattle, is there a place that I can market my cattle, my calves to, that I get a higher price? Is there a way that I can do that? Is there a way that I can lower my expenses, but not lower them in a way that's going to have you have fewer animals? Because if you don't feed your animals as well one year, they're not going to breed back, as Vicki was talking about fertility issues and things like that in the last presentation. And so just because I lower some expenses, if it causes me to have fewer calves, then that's not really increasing my margin. So, but I have seen some operations that maybe found a different source of feed. I'm from northern Utah, so we have to feed over the winter months. And I believe Vicki does too, up in South Dakota. And so if we can find places that maybe we can keep them on the range a couple weeks longer, or put them to some fields that have been harvested, but they can be fenced off temporarily, and we can use those for a couple weeks of hay, then that can help lower our expenses without lowering the quality of the herd.
And so this goes back to rotating. So if you have your pastures and you can do some cross fencing, which means if you have a square and you divide it into 4, you can move them from one to the next. And that also helps with that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways you can do it, and you have to kind of look at your own situation. But if you break it down to, I'm trying to lower my expenses, or I'm trying to increase my price or increase my yield, hopefully that can help you think about it. So if you've got a good margin, then we can look at our fixed costs, and our fixed costs are, again, after we have this margin as a whole times our quantity, we subtract our fixed cost, and what's left over is our profit. So if our fixed costs are too high, even though we're making money on our calves, we could be spending all of it on our operation and not have any profit left over. Yeah. And so we can look at things like, how many units does it take to cover my fixed cost? And so if we just take the fixed cost, divide it by a margin, that'll tell us how many calves it would take to cover it, or how many bales of hay, or whatever other unit we use. Do you have equipment that sits idle for long periods of time?
Yeah. And
sometimes you can't avoid this because you have very specific equipment that you might need. But if that's the case, is there a way that you can lease it or use it in a way that it doesn't cost you as much money? Also, can you use used equipment instead of new equipment? How many bulls do I have per cow? So you need enough that you don't have fertility issues, that you get the calves that you want, so that quantity is there. But if you have one bull for every cow, those extra bulls are probably not, at some point, not doing you any good.
Yeah.
Okay, but no, yeah, you want one bull for 20 to 25 cows. So you definitely, and then any more than that is not productive. They fight too much. Trent?
Yeah, it's there's big debates about this of where you're at, depending on the range conditions you're in, the amount of coverage, what type of breed you're doing. Some of them will go up to 30, but they better have good protection, good health management, and good coverage on it if you're going to do that, because you can really get in trouble quickly.
Which goes right back to our previous webinar on herd health. So please tune into that if you haven't.
So,
And the same with what Ruby's talking about, these fixed costs, because when you get down and you have when your margin's good, you don't always have to have the best, shiniest new equipment on there. You're right. You want to kind of minimize that. Ruby already hit on that, but I just want to reemphasize, we talked about that last time too.
so,
Sorry, Ruby, I really want to point out that is also bulls. Bulls are equipment. You don't need to pay $10,000 for a bull. Make sure there's good genetics, because genetics are definitely the foundation which we are trying to build of your herd. But you don't need to spend a huge amount, or sometimes leasing is the best option, right, Ruby?
Mhm.
Leasing bulls, because then they're tested already when they come to you.
Yep.
One of the things that is most important is that testing bulls is expensive, but what you don't understand is it's way more expensive to have no calves than to test one bull.
yeah,
And
so
that's
put it in
very important.
perspective of how many calves is it costing you for that test, and how many calves are at risk if something's wrong and those test results could be used to prevent losing that many calves. So kind of put some of those things in perspectives. So Trent and I actually came up with a lot of the basis for this as I was presenting at Shiprock Ag Days several years ago, and we were driving from the Albuquerque airport up to Shiprock. And we were talking about what is our test here. And Trent came up with the idea, if your horse trailer is the envy of, or your truck is the envy of your neighbors, you might have excessive fixed costs. And so that's the last one here. And I've seen this both on the nations and off nations, where people are talking about it. In North Dakota, several years ago, when farming was doing really good back in maybe like 2014, 2015, somebody talked about building mini cathedrals as grain storage and shops and stuff. And you build those, but you have to pay for them. And the same thing with the truck or the trailer. Does having a shiny truck help me have more calves? And so that's where we say, kind of put things in perspective. But at the same time, sometimes you need equipment that works, because if you're trying to put up hay and it's going to get rained on, you can lose a lot of hay. And so that's where it's useful to have some equipment that you can do some of that, or leasing arrangements. And that's what Vicki was getting at. That test, it may be worth it to spend some money to make sure your bull is good, but you don't have to spend so much money that you're not going to recoup. So here is a ranch situation. It's a 50-head ranch with a 75% calving rate. And so you can see here on the income, we have the calves, we have coal bulls and coal cows that we're selling. And so all together, that gives us a little over $27,000 worth of income. And if we put that per cow in our herd, that breaks down to about $544 per cow. And then we have our variable costs, our grazing fees, our feed, other inputs are our livestock expenses, and our labor. And so in total, that's costing us $16,000 or $326 per cow. And so our net cash return over those variable expenses, and I didn't spell variable right, but our total income minus our variable expenses, that is our margin, what we were talking about. So that's the amount of money, that $10,900 or $218 per cow. That's what we have available to cover our fixed costs and what's left over for profit. And so down here, I have my fixed costs, and we've broken them into two categories. There's the cash fixed costs, which we're paying money physically out for. Property tax, insurance are a couple of those. That's $3,500. And then there's depreciation. And depreciation is taking some of these multi-year expenses like buying equipment, maybe some infrastructure, fencing, some of those other types of things on your operation. And we might buy those in 1 year, but we're using them for several years. So depreciation is taking a portion of those costs and applying it to each year. So even though it's a cost that we have to cover, it's not actually cash going out the door that year because it came from spending cash in a previous year. So that's $7,000 for this operation. And then so our total expenses, the variable and the fixed cost, are $23,000, a little over $23,000. And then, so that means our net ranch income is $3,790 in this situation, or $76 per cow.
Okay, and I just want to point out in this that your goal, though, as a producer should be a death rate of between 6 and 8%.
Okay.
But this is showing an extreme offset of that. Correct, Trent?
Yeah, we're just getting the numbers up there to show you what it's looking like
Yeah.
up here. We can, and that's the whole point of this, getting at what the breakdown is. Because you go back to what Ruby's talking about, what does we mean by margin and what's the fixed cost? Those are the two things going to the profit.
Yeah.
So once we get those in, we can look and we can start tweaking. And I think we, a little later on here, we'll go looking at these percentage changes and how much
Perfect.
on the sensitivity and what impact those have on those kind of things to see where you're truly at on that.
So one of the questions we can ask is, will increasing our quantity increase our profit? And because sometimes people say, well, I just need to get bigger. I need to get bigger. But there's times where actually getting bigger can make you go out of business faster. And so what we're really looking at is if you have that positive margin, because that's what you're getting over your variable expenses, then getting bigger would mean you have more funds to cover your fixed costs. So then you'd have to look at it and can it balance and stuff. So in this case, we do, because we have a positive margin of $218 per cow. So if we got bigger, we would have more money. The other thing is, but what about our fixed costs? Are they too excessive? And we can start to look at that. But just because your situation works, you may also want to look at what happens if cattle prices decrease by 10%. So cattle prices can move quite a bit. This year, they've moved a lot. And so just understanding kind of what would happen to your profit if your cattle prices go down or your cattle prices go up. What happens if variable costs increase by 10% or more? Several years ago, the fuel prices jumped or tripled within the one operating year. I think it was 2008, 2009, somewhere in there. And so just kind of understanding a little bit about not just what you've penciled out, but then what happens if things change. And we're going to show you how you can analyze those changes. But this is just kind of iteratively kind of going into what, but we need some of these numbers to be able to do that, because we have to start with somewhere that we can start to look at what happens if things change. And there's some ways to summarize your numbers, because sometimes you put those budgets together and you have so many different numbers floating around, it's hard to keep them in your head. So this is just ways to summarize it. And you can put those returns for the whole operation above the variable cost, because of that first, that's my margin. So I'm first looking there above my variable and my fixed costs, my cash fixed costs. That's the next threshold to you're looking at. And then if you can cover all of your costs, that's good too. And so we're breaking it down into those three things. And we can look at it for the whole operation. We could look at it for per cow, or we could look at it per calf that we sell, or per hundredweight of the calves that we sell. And so there's just different ways, and there's nothing right or wrong. All of these columns are the same, but some people, just in the way that they think about things, it works better for them to think about it in one column versus another.
Yeah, Vicky, what do you typically look at? Do you look at calves sold per cow, or do you look at the per hundredweight or weight, or you just look at per cow returns?
So we look at per cow and how quickly we can cash flow that cow. Meaning how quickly she will start making us money.
Yeah.
So for us, we want 2 calf crops, and then that cow is giving us a return immediately within 2 years.
And I've worked with a lot of ranchers that like it to do it on pound of beef sold per unit or for their ranch, so they know how much they're getting out of it. You know,
Yeah.
especially if they're on a lease and they're doing something
Like when we're looking at a bunch of cows to buy, we take the whole number versus the calves, and we take always the lower number and we divide it so we know how many years it'll take for us to actually make money on that cow. So this goes back to what Ruby's talking about. If you borrow money on cows you're buying, what I'm talking about is paying off that loan so that then that cow is making money for you.
Yeah, and the what Vicky's talking about is really just saying, how long does it take us to break even? You know, and so how long does it take us? We've got so much fixed cost into this calc that we bought that we're finding that margin per cow and saying, how many calf crops is it going to take us to pay that fixed cost back? So different ways to look at it. So this kind of summarizes everything that we've gone over, and could also be kind of seen as a little bit of a checklist that you could go through. And so if you have a negative margin, that means that your variable costs are higher than your price that you're selling it for. You can quit and do something else as a strategy. There may be other livestock. There may be a different type of livestock operation. There may be other markets that you're going into. If you have a low margin, you've got to get that price up or decrease your costs, or get the quantity, get your calves to weigh a little bit higher, get your fertility up a little bit, but something that can get that up a little bit. Pool your livestock, that may help you get a higher price for them. Charge more. If you're doing something where you're selling things individually, sometimes people say, I've seen people, this isn't a cattle example, but they said, I went to the farmer's market and I sold everything out in the first 20 minutes, but yet they're not, but say, I can't cover my costs. And so I said, well, it's probably that you're not selling it for enough. You know, if you're selling out, you know, so quickly and stuff. So sometimes we undervalue ourselves too. I talked about earlier about using the pasture a little bit longer. I've seen operations that just the labor kills them, you know, because they're paying a lot for their labor. I've also seen this in multi-generational families or multi-family operations where they're bringing other family members into the operation, but it didn't increase in size. So now the labor is higher for it, but they haven't done anything to cover that labor. EQIP is a NRCS program that has a cost share. Maybe you can get your range to be better, and that would help you get heavier calves or more calves. So you can look at things like that. If your margin is good, then you look at your fixed costs. If your fixed costs are high, you need to decrease them or increase the revenue from them, so get more money out of them, or increase the number that you're doing. So sell some equipment. You know what I mean? Do you have something there that you bought that you really is too excessively priced? You know, get rid of it. Can you get more money out of it? Can you use that equipment to do something for somebody else? And so we're getting more money, extra money out of it. Can we just have, maybe we just need to increase our herd size. If we're not using our resources in our pasture and stuff efficiently, then there may be some room to actually start to grow our herd just a little bit. But we don't want to grow our herd so much that we're then overusing our range and decreasing our quality. So all of these things, it's a delicate balance. The average fixed costs increase your volume. If you have good fixed costs now, good job. But this is really kind of our prescription to go through to kind of look at your operation from a financial situation. And as you can see, I used very little numbers here because sometimes it's all about really thinking about your operation as much as it is making a calculation.
Yeah, I agree. And these are all really good points on there. As you know, increasing your herd size, you're going to have to increase your labor. at some point, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to get all those animals handled. If you don't have an association that's helping you, a brand or a lot of neighbors come around, and it can start to put a stress on the family if you overload too quick and you're not growing at a balanced rate.
Juan?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can also be that the change in the market or even the location you were selling your cattle or your product,
Yeah.
because if they're not paying the price you want and they keep undervaluing your animals, then you might have to look for another location that will increase your price.
Yep.
And I
Yeah,
think it's important to point out that your fixed costs will, because that includes your vaccinations, it includes your labor. I mean, so everything goes up as you build.
So let's go on. So now so that gave us our basics and our foundation of what we mean by finance, for your numbers and stuff. And then now you can go into analyzing your own situation. So this is that same example that I had before, but I just pulled off a few of the numbers to just kind of make it more simple. And so this is what I said, you can kind of summarize those, but at a minimum, really to start to do financial analysis in your situation, this is really a minimum amount of information that you need. You need to at least have your total sales dollars that you got for the year, your variable costs and your fixed costs. The reason we have to separate these out is because they behave a lot differently. Fixed costs, again, are not going to go up if we have a few more animals, but our variable costs would. And so that's why we want to separate those two out. And then the sales minus the variable cost, that's our margin that we were talking about. In this case, it was $10,000. And then our profit is $3,000. I also did these as percent of sales. So you can also look at, in this case, 40% on every dollar that they sell is going to cover the fixed costs and the profit. So that's also another way to think about the margin.
Yeah.
And 14 cents out of every dollar they sell is coming back as profit. And then from here, we can break it out just a little bit more. And so I just took those variable costs and put them into a few different categories. And so this gives us even more detail that we can use to do a financial analysis. And I would say this is where I would like to have numbers if I'm going to start to look at different situations and stuff, is this amount of information. And there's a lot we can do with looking at your situation from just this amount of information. I broke out the feed because, and obviously I got my percentages all wrong. I must have copied something over. So ignore the percent of sales column there because it's completely messed up. And so it wasn't when I was doing it, but somehow when I copied and pasted, it messed everything up. So, but feed is a lot of times one of the biggest costs that you have in an operation. And in feed, I'm saying how you get them fed. So that could be your pasture lease. That could also be any feed that you put, you buy and other types of things. Other inputs, your labor. And then I put marketing here because sometimes in some types of operation that becomes its own expense. But I put it 0 because I didn't break it out from the other costs for this situation. Our gross margin, then we have our fixed costs and our profit again. So same thing that we've been looking at, just broke out a little bit differently. And so when we break it out that far, then sensitivity analysis is a tool that we've used a long time because we've gone back and forth on really sophisticated tools to less sophisticated tools. But sensitivity, we think, really gives us that balance of being able to do a lot of different analysis and a lot of flexibility, but we don't need to know lots of numbers. And so why I do it is we make our best guess, because really when we're putting a budget together, every line on there is a guess because we're just estimating what's going to happen in the future. And so we want to know what's going to happen if something goes wrong. So I want to plan for that emergency fund like we were talking about as in the last presentation and last week. And so I want to see kind of how big that might need to be, because I can put in some things about what could go wrong and how bad is that going to make me look. I want to look at the good. So what happens if I make some changes and things go right? What can I look forward to if I can get some of that changed? The bad and the ugly. So This is to just be able to say what happens if, and changing one assumption may cause bigger changes in the results. And we'll see that when we start to look at an actual situation. So things that we're looking at is what happens to affect your net profit. There's usually a physical thing that could happen as far as like range conditions. We have a drought right now in Utah. There's parts of it that are having a lot of cricket and grasshopper infestations. I think Vicki has some grasshoppers too that they're dealing with in her area. I'm not sure how bad they are in Arizona, but I know in southern Utah, they're pretty bad this
And
year.
it's drought and fire for us at the most part. But
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
fire and drought.
They're an indicator of drought. So just,
So is what we want to do is have those things that we know might be happening, like the drought and the grasshoppers and stuff, but then we want to know, what's that doing? Is that causing us to have fewer calves? Is it causing us to have, what's the effect of that? Is it increasing our costs because we're trying to control them? The fire, the drought, you know what I mean? Am I going to get less feed, so my calves are going to be lighter? What's going to happen and stuff? So we can think about what's really happening, and then we've got to think about how is it going to affect one of those things in our profit, and then that can help us make those adjustments and help us understand where we're at. And I think this makes a lot more sense if we actually do it. And so we're going to get into and pull up an Excel file and show us how we can actually start to look at this. But as I said before, we need to start out with knowing our revenue or money that flows in. We need to know some of that information on what flows out for our expenses, our labor, our overhead. And then you can also convert those to percentages of revenue. So for every dollar, something happens. But that's kind of the basics of what we need to know. And so I am now going to end the slideshow and quit sharing my screen. And I'm going to start, I'll start up the Excel file that we have as a tool for you and share that with you. And then we can go through and let me just get that opened, and then I will share my screen again. All right, so you should see the Excel file now. And I've already got our situation into it in the green cells. And so the green here is the 27,000 we had in our revenue from selling our calves and our coal animals. We have our feed costs in here, our inputs, our labor. And then, so that's showing that our margin is 40%, because all of those variable costs is 60% of every dollar. And so we're left with 40% as our gross margin. We have our overhead as the fixed cost, the $7,000 here. So our total expenses are $23,000. That's the variable and our fixed expenses. And then our net income before taxes. I also have a place in here that we could put taxes, but I'm actually going to zero that out for our discussion. I know that some people are subject to taxes for part of their income and some people aren't with tribal situations, but it's there if we need to use it, but we don't need to. I'm going to do it without considering that for right now. So this is the simplest amount or way that we have that we can start to do some things. So suppose we had a 75% calving rate. So if I want to do something, like say we can get those calves to weigh 10% more, then that actually, I said like little changes in one part of the operation could actually cause bigger changes in another part. So if you ended up being able to sell your animals for 10% more because you got the weight up, or you got 10% more animals through fertility management or something, with this situation, that's actually going to increase that net profit by 72%. But the bad part is, if we're doing something that causes that to go down by 10%, the same kind of thing is going to happen. It's going to wipe out 72% of your operations profit. So that's why we're concerned about some of these issues of like fertility management, if your range conditions are good, some of those other types of things, because even though they might cost some money, it may be having a bigger effect on your calf crop. And so this
Yeah.
is just a way to kind of think about that.
Yeah, Ruby and it's good to point this out because a lot of people think that this is kind of like a linear or an equal. So if I go down my revenue, then my profits are going to go down. Net income's only go down by 10% too. So you may be misjudging a lot of things until you really start to analyze it. And that's why what Ruby's pointing out here on that 72% change is important to understand that.
And it's also important to understand that this is for this set of numbers.
Yes,
If this set of numbers was different, this percentage would also be different.
yes,
It still is always, you're going to get your biggest change from a change in your revenue. That's going to be your biggest change normally, unless your cost is bigger than your revenue, which we hope that that's not a situation. You're always going to get your biggest effect from a change in your revenue. So it's going to be the most. We can also look at a situation like, so let's put this back as a positive. Oops. Let me just. Okay, so we've got our positive back there, but what if we increased our herd size by 10% more? This is assuming you have good, enough pasture and land that you could do it. And so in doing so, our feed's probably, maybe our feed, if we have a pasture lease and so we feed part of the year, maybe that's only going up by 5% because we were underutilizing our range that we already were taking care of. So, and the lease that we had. Our inputs though are probably going to go up by the same amount because we have more animals. Labor, it may be that again only goes up by very little because a lot of our labor, we're always going to go out and check the cows, but we're going to take a little bit more time to brand. We're going to take a little bit more time for some of working the animals and stuff. So maybe that goes up, but not by as much because we already have everybody there. We already have everything set up. And then our fixed costs shouldn't go up by just that big of a change because we're not going to buy a new trailer. We're not going to buy a new truck for this change. And so in this case, increase in our herd by 10% resulted in a 41% increase in net income. And that's the same thing as Trent was talking about with that linear relationship. So the other things that we can use this for is some of the stuff that's gone on now. So if this was our situation last year, these set of numbers, and then what we're dealing with COVID here, it might not look pretty, but we can start to actually put in some of the situations and see what are we dealing with, and then see if there's other things that we can compensate for. So I think I've got current numbers. So the current numbers that we have in here for the revenue, I think it already reflects the current cattle prices, doesn't it, Trent?
yeah, yeah.
So I'm not going to change that, but with the drought, I may need to increase my feed costs because I've got drought and I may need to supplement with some supplements or, buy some feed. So maybe that's a 10% increase, and that's going to drop me by 12%. So that's what I was saying before, that all of these changes aren't going to behave the same way. And that's why we want to be able to have these numbers separated out so we can understand what happens to the changes in them. And so that's where, I may have some supplements. I may also have, maybe my prices are current, but maybe my calves, because I have to take them off the range earlier, or the fire or other types of things, they're going to be lighter. So what if those calves are, what percent should we say they are lighter?
5%.
How much?
Just try 5%.
Yeah, 5% is plenty.
So those two things, by having to increase your feed costs by 10%, your calves, weighing 5% less, you're talking about dropping your income in half for this set of numbers. Again, it might not be the same for a different set of numbers, but that's why this tool can be used to just kind of see what's happening. And the reason I want to look at this tool, even though it might not be pleasant, it's much more pleasant to really kind of think about this in July, when we could start seeing if there's changes that we could make, can we find, do something so I can start to preparing now, and know how much my income might be dropping that, you know, is there something else that I can do? Do I need to start to seek some financial assistance? Is there a farm program that I can start to do? Do I need to start talking to a lender early on and saying, can I stretch those loans out and, you know, get them so I have a less level loan payment because we're doing it over multiple years? You know, just, I think that it gives you more control to know what you might be dealing with than to be able to just kind of wait for it to happen, but know it's probably going to be bad.
Yeah, and I like to do this to also look at what kind of emergency fund or buffer do I need in there to kind of absorb these impacts up front. You know, as you're sitting there in January, you're looking at your calf crop, trying to figure that out. You can do some numbers, and if you're seeing something changing, you can just kind of play around with this. Okay, you know, but that's if you like playing with numbers. A lot of folks don't really like to sit down there and do all that all the time, but it's something to help you. Like Ruby said, maybe I need to get in a couple of these different programs, and maybe the cost of getting that program is worth it now because it's going to cover me. It's going to bump my income back up. It's going to remove that 10%, and it might only cost me 5% up front.
And when we talk about the cost of doing that, so that is more like you doing record keeping.
Yeah.
And with your FSA office for a couple of hours to get registered if you are not. I want to point out that during COVID, as you're not able to eat out, you need to look at those expenses that you're saving and be able to switch those to your operations so that, you know, when COVID is over, that you're in a good position.
Yeah. I think Ruby got kicked out, so.
Karen, can you give an example of what the inputs would be on the Excel sheet that we were sharing earlier?
On the sensitivity,
Let me see.
I'll go back to
now.
when she was talking about those percentage of sales on there. So I think Ruby's
Can you see
on
my
there.
screen?
I can see your screen, yes.
All right. Do you want to share it?
Oh no, I don't have mine on there. So
Okay.
but I could if you.
We
Yeah.
can't manipulate numbers because it was Ruby's, but
Can you see the Excel sheet?
Well, kind of. We can only see part of it. It's really big. So in the two spreadsheets she was talking about, and she was really close, you know, on that the one formula, it was a percentage off, but it really, when she's breaking out those feed costs, those variable costs, you know, feed inputs, and it was a really high percentage change.
Okay.
So they were really like the feed was 17%, the inputs were 32%, and the labor was 11%, which adds up to that 60% she was talking about in there.
Yeah.
But that was just breaking down so you could see where more of the inputs were at. And it was just a slight little deal, but I just wanted to, so those numbers are there, and you'll be able to have these spreadsheets. So they'll be able to enter your own numbers. And I think that's important. I think Ruby's getting back on. To see where we're at with that. But the sensitivity analysis, we use that one a lot. It's just kind of helps you look at where you're going on somebody. And you go back to that water, you know, it kind of helps you see who's pressing down harder and longer on that water than anything else in there. And
Right.
in this case, it might be the feed, the weight of the bale is really leveling down on that, draining it more. So it's a lot.
well,
thirstier.
so, and I love this example. So my husband has a cousin in Texas who cannot, for the life of him, understand why we bale hay to go give it to our cows because he's in Texas. Like, just turn him out. But it is, you know, so when you get to thinking about that, it's really helped me determine whether or not we need to hay a pasture. Do we have enough?
Right.
Should I turn them out on that pasture next summer instead of going through the cost of baling it? Because when you think about it, I mean, it is pretty crazy that we bale up this hay and take it back to our cows And so anytime that you can eliminate those costs, which is haying, mechanics, fuel, I mean, there's a lot associated with that. So I mean,
Sure.
also very important to consider.
Yeah, it is. And then but the opposite is the higher risk on there is if you get a blizzard, longer term blizzard or multiple blizzards, something's going to happen in there.
Yeah.
You don't have enough of it. It's
Yeah.
really hard sometimes to find that extra hay and get it there at a reasonable price, right? We ran that those couple of years ago. That
Yes.
massive hay shortages around there trying
Yeah.
to ship it out. So what we're doing on there, and we're looking at the Ruby spreadsheet, seeing where those, where you have some flexibility in there and which ones are leaning on that water spigot more than you really should, you know,
Yeah.
and where you could maybe move it off the spigot.
And where I live, I mean, when you have a ton of hay, it's as good as gold. And I mean that the bank literally asks how much hay we have in reserve, and it goes to the positive for us. So yeah, you
Yeah.
just have to weigh all of that. And that's what, and Ruby's back now, so we'll let her wrap up, but we're just
Yeah,
gonna carry
so-
on.
I got on my phone, my internet went out. So I'm using my Wi-Fi, but using my phone internet. But the tools are going to be available on the University of Arizona Tribal Extension website. I think we can post a link back to it on the Facebook page also where this recording is. And you can also contact your FERTEP agent and they should be able to also find access to it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we'll be sending out
it's-
the links for everyone to post.
Yeah, and remember though, these are, we think these are really good tools, but if you're comfortable with something else, but these are the numbers, these are the things you need to be tracking, but you need to make it fit your system. But you need to be able to look at these numbers in this kind of manner,
Yes.
so it has to be
We're
able to
just
get you
giving
to that point.
examples of what has worked and that is simple, but that does not mean that what you're doing is incorrect.
Right,
So stay tuned because in a month, we're going to do another webinar and we're going to go to the next steps. So try and answer some of these questions because at the end of these webinars, you are going to be set up to the next step.
and download the app, download some of these spreadsheets, play around with them. If you have questions, let us know, let somebody know. We can help you. There'll be plenty of information out there that we can get you. So yeah, just go around, play around. Remember, no right or wrong answer. Just we want you to get started on it and get going on it.
Thank you for attending.
Alrighty.
Thank you
Thank you.
guys. Amazing.